There we go. So she can catch up. So I think the agenda may have gotten a little messed up because there's a couple repeats. So I think the first item was going to be the introduction of George. George was, I don't have to say he drew the short straw or was voluntold uh, to be the newest member of the ZBA. And I believe we owe a huge thanks to Carol for helping make that happen. George, we're really excited to have you. I don't know if you want to introduce yourself. And in fact, and I don't know if you know everyone on the call, we could take a minute to introduce ourselves as well, if that would be helpful.
Well, yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people in town, and there are a lot of newer people because we've been here since '85 that I haven't met yet, and I look forward to that. I was on the planning board for 11 years. Some of those as its chair. We had a lot of interesting things going on in those 11 years. One of my nicest memories actually is that Jim Rapetti served on the board with me, and you all know about Jim, what a quality guy he is. So yeah, I think certainly a board of appeals especially with 40B issues, that's got to be approached thoughtfully. It's those projects certainly impact a town. And then there are other matters too. So I look forward to serving.
Well, again, George, thank you so much.
My arm is still sore from where you twisted it, Carol.
There's a verb for that. It's to get Lisboned. I did not make that up. I've heard that.
Who was it? Rob Andrews? Katie? Who said that?
I'm not telling.
That's a good one. So why don't we just go around? So George, we've met virtually and talked. So we've had a chance to meet. I know I had my camera off because I was just getting some stuff ready, but I know you and Kay maybe have met before and introduced each other. And I think she introduced you to Jason, Carol. Anna, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, nice to meet you. I'm Anna Nagy. I'm Conservation Commissioner. Grew up in town. Have had the exciting project of getting started on our Sustainability Committee.
That's great. Janet?
Hi, George. Congratulations or sympathies. And I serve as the town's Conservation Commission agent. I previously served on the commission, and I've lived in town for over 30 years. So very nice to meet you.
Well, it's nice to meet you finally.
Walter? Oh, you're on mute, Walter. Oh, there you go.
Am I unmuted now?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. Walter Avalone, Building Commissioner.
And last but not least, Jasmine.
Hi, George. We actually had the pleasure of meeting a few times, so nice to see you on Zoom.
Perfect. And George, as we said, in order to help convince you to do this, we are all willing and able to help in any way we can. Chris and I will continue to be a resource, and then we'll also get you connected with our town council as well to meet with them. That way, you'll have everything you need, hopefully.
Oh, that's great. Yes.
Awesome. So then I think going back to I think it's kind of the first item again. I think they were copy and pasted a little wrong. Was the housing study, and then specifically the status of the RFP, which I can report the status is 0, unfortunately. So Carol and I actually just had a conversation that we really need to get that moving. So I know that myself, Chris, Jasmine, Janet, and Jody had kind of been volunteered as the committee or subcommittee, whatever we want to call ourselves, responsible for getting a draft going. So I was able to pull some examples of RFPs that maybe we could use as a starting block or template. So I'm going to take that group offline. I'll send out some calendar polls to see if we can find a time that we can meet either in person or on Zoom, so we can get this kicked off. Because, to Carol's point, the intention was to be at town meeting less than a year from now, in May of 25. And if this RFP doesn't get out the door soon, that's going to be problematic. So we do have to get that moving. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add. Oh, Janet, you have your hand up.
So I was just hoping to get a clarification from Jasmine and Carol on potential overlap between the MBTA bylaw work and this larger housing study. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that as we work on an RFP.
So I think that if we think back to the presentation that Robin made at town meeting about the $100,000 that she was requesting, or that we were requesting, that we all were requesting, there are a couple different parts to it. And it's an excellent question, Janet, because I think it's something that we're going to have to sort of work with over time to keep and to manage the overlap, but also the distinct aspects of it. We have an MBTA bylaw. We have a consultant being paid for by the state. Jeff Davis, Jeff Lacey. We have two Jeffs we're working with grants. Which one is it? Jeff Davis from Horton Witten, who is being paid by the state to support us in our MBTA work. We have him through, I believe it's the end of September, right? Jasmine got the grant that extended. So we are working with him with the time constraint of September 30th, which is why we're working on the actual MBTA bylaw. Because there are two aspects to the MBTA Communities Act. One is us putting together a bylaw. The other is us identifying an overlay district or overlay districts. Jeff can't really help us with that other than when we've identified areas, he could put it into the model to make sure that it's kosher. But what he can do between now and the end of September is really work with us to put together the draft bylaw, regardless of what the overlay districts are going to be. And because we have that time constraint of September, that's what we're sort of been focusing on. And Janet, I just saw your wonderful input that you sent out. So thank you for that. The Housing Task Force is, looking at making sure that the processes we have in place for 40Bs are comprehensive and that nothing falls through the cracks, that we meet the requirements of the MBTA Communities Act. But third, and almost more important on an umbrella basis, is to help us come up with a housing philosophy so that as we're looking at either applications that come in or laws that get passed on Beacon Hill, or just doing the kind of forward-thinking planning that town government should be doing, that we've really sussed out and really thought through with town input on what the housing population should look like in the future. Is that, Mike and Jasmine, basically what you see for the RFP?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Yeah, I think that you nailed it. I think there is going to be that overlap, but it is something separate and distinct from the MBTA process.
I mean, I have no doubt that if it was a Judy Barrett type person, that she can help us with everything. Not only the longer term future planning for housing, but also questions that we have specifically on MBTA or 40B processes and so forth. So
Carol, just a follow-up. Do you anticipate that Jeff is going to be able to incorporate or the overlay district identification? Do you think that's going to need to happen into the fall? And is that something that should perhaps be in the RFP as a possible task?
So I was actually going to talk about that on item number 3 of the agenda, but I'll mention this now. So one of the things that so the planning board reviewed his draft bylaw at our meeting last week, and have lots of notes that are going to go back to him. Some of them consistent with your suggestions, Janet, as well, which is to use the bylaw as an opportunity to bring in some of the NRPZ, the natural resource protection zoning, tree type stuff into the bylaw. But we've already identified, we gave Jeff 4 properties to look at. The Pulte property down on Junction Street that came up last summer. And then the County Court 40B, the Meadows 40B, and the Dover Farms 40B. So he has already done that analysis. And we'll get that report out to you if you don't have it. But I've communicated with Amy Moot over the last week, because there might be other areas that we want to consider for an overlay district. And one of the things that the Open Space Committee keeps is a listing of large properties. We don't publish it in the open space plan because we don't want developers getting a hold of it. But Amy has it, so she's going to take a look at it. She wants to update it, and I said, well, just get me the old one, and when you have a chance to update it, but at least we can get started. Because, for instance, had Pulte not notified us about their interest in the Junction Street property, we never would have thought about that property. So there might be other things out there. So that's just something we're just beginning to explore, other than the 4 that we had asked him to look at.
Great, thank you.
If I don't know if anyone else has anything, the RFP, anything additional, but we could just keep rolling, Carol, with the MBTA piece. I don't know if you and Jasmine want to talk a little bit more about the draft or.
Okay, I'll turn it over to Jasmine in a moment to go through it and maybe share the screen of it. But basically, Jasmine and Jody have been working with Jeff, and he has put together a very preliminary draft. And the foundation of the draft is our multi-family housing bylaw, which has never, ever been used in Dover. Was that from your day, George?
Yeah, I mean, it's developers find it, they will go the straightest line possible between 2 points. Yeah.
Right. But for the purposes of coming up with the specs about, lot size and all those kind of stuff, Jeff thought, well, if the town already had something in the multifamily bylaw, whether it was used or not, it's a good starting spot.
Yeah.
So that's what the draft is. It's just a starting spot. So let me turn this over to Jasmine, since she's the one that's working closely with Jeff on this, to go through some of the issues that we need to talk about as a committee. Some that are very specific, but some that are philosophical as well, like affordable housing. So Jasmine, I'll turn it over.
Sure. I don't know if you'd like me to share my screen so everybody can see it.
Probably be easy.
I don't have screen share capability. Go through. Can everybody see this?
Yep.
Okay. So as a basic overview, I don't want to read this word for word because Jeff will be here at a future meeting and will be able to answer a lot more in-depth questions than I can. But essentially, this bylaw creates a by right multifamily residence district that provides for multifamily dwellings under state law, Chapter 40A, Section 3A. It preserves the rural character of the town while diversifying housing options, ensures housing harmony with neighboring buildings, and conserves environmental features and historic sites. It encourages higher density housing to diversify Dover's housing inventory, and promotes superior design and planning standards. So this is proposed to be an overlay district on an existing zone that will allow multifamily dwellings by right and will under site plan review. It includes a minimum lot size of 20,000 square feet, a frontage of 100 feet, building height of 2.5 stories or 35 feet, whichever is less, lot coverage of 25%, setbacks of 50 feet, minimum open space requirement of 40%, and a minimum of 32 feet between residential buildings to prevent overmassing and ensure architectural harmony. You're muted, Carol. You're muted on Zoom.
So those D1 through 8 specs on setbacks and so forth, come from the our current zoning bylaws. Something that we really need to think about, and we will need input from this task force, as well as more input from the planning board as well, is that if you start doing the math and you take a 20,000 square foot minimum lot size, which is 0.46 acres, and then you say that only 25%, that the maximum lot coverage is 25%. Well, that only leaves 12/10 of an acre. I'm sorry, 0.12 acres. And then you start applying the minimum open space and the setbacks. And there's no way that you can build on a 20,000 square foot minimum lot size. So it's a detail, but those are the types of things that the planning board, need to get into, because that's why bylaws are so complicated and difficult to get through, because you have to start thinking about the details. So one of the questions I'd like to throw out for discussion, as we work on additional drafts of this, is what is the minimum lot size that makes sense in Dover? On a practical and philosophically, as well as on a practical basis, given all the other limitations we have to lot coverage and so forth. So not an answer today, but just something that we need to think about.
Carol, another thing to think about, and I don't know if, I think like the MMA has a model, or I've seen model MBTA bylaws, but the other thing you could do, because development is so site specific, it's hard to have a one size fits all, and that a provision that would allow waiver of some of these minimum sizes built in, that would give the planning board some flexibility. That might be one way around this, that ideally we'd like 40% open space, but that might not be realistic or doable for every site. So just something to think about.
Thank you, Janet. It's a good approach. And I would also say along this same issue here is, we received a grant, planning board received a grant in 2023, 2024 to work on natural resource protection zoning and or tree preservation work. And we're inclined to use the money this coming year for more for tree preservation work. But it brings up the issue that when you think about the issues we've had with stormwater and how we're working to try to get some tree preservation stuff into that bylaw, and the work that's going to be done by the tree committee to put together a real draft tree preservation bylaw, like all the other towns around us have that we don't, then as we approach this, we would want to integrate into this type of development a similar philosophy about tree preservation and the use of open space and so forth. So that too is going to have to be fleshed out, because it's really not discussed in any kind of sufficient detail here in this first draft. I'll turn it back over to Jasmine.
One of the other requirements we have are all utilities are placed underground, which is an existing regulation of the planning board. Obviously must avoid overmassing, adequate methods for providing waste disposal and water availability with the Board of Health. We'd really like to develop a type of stringent process for applicants as they come in to apply under the zones. That way there's no confusion over which department they're going to for approvals first. We do have mention of bylaw chapter 159, which is going to be the stormwater bylaw that may be updated once the E code is updated. So it's just may just be a placeholder number for there right now. We do require that they follow requirements for highway department for roof design and roadways. We do require that open land shall be developed and maintained as owner and management by the development. Open land shall be restricted to one or more uses such as conservancy or open space districts, subject by approval of the Board of Health, and may be used for subsurface waste disposal for the provisions of underground utilities. One issue with parking, we had discussed having no more than 2.5 car spaces for each dwelling. We're assuming 2 cars for each dwelling, and then each person having a visitor at some point.
Do we know whether a residential development like this requires handicap parking?
No, it does not.
Does not? Okay, thank you.
There shall be no more than 2 means of access, whether a subdivision by way, and this is the reference to the highway requirements, chapter 199.13. Each parking space shall contain a minimum of 200 square feet. And it goes over construction requirements, lighting shall not spill over to properties. Waivers, the planning board may waive any of the above requirements. All applicants for development shall follow the process for full site plan review per this section. And then they may decide if they would like to do it as a subdivision as well. Just depends on how the ownership of the parcels is going to break down. Proposals for disposition of sanitary waste and stormwater and availability of potable water is a requirement. And then applications under subdivision control law. These are some comments that I had from Jody from the planning board. She would just like to define the term driveway. She had asked if we could actually provide material and color requirements. I'm not familiar with being able to do that. Usually that's something under a homeowners association, but I can always check with Nina as to the applicability of that. We do have a no shared driveway bylaw currently under the zoning bylaw, so we have to amend that to say except for under this section of the bylaw. We would like to have shared driveways to enable the density. Then obviously she's saying here, we would like to have a legal description of whichever the area is, wherever it is that we decide the zone is, we should have it surveyed by a professional land surveyor and have a legal description of the area of the overlay zone. And we should have a unique site plan review process for the overlay district, just as we do for the accessory dwelling units. And Janet, you had made some additional comments today, and one of them was about affordability, but I believe that we'd already discussed that with the housing task force, and they said that that was not something they were looking into doing, if I recall that correctly.
Carol, you're on mute.
Thank you. I hope you've all seen the Carlisle document that I sent out on how Carlisle is looking to identify overlay district possibilities. And it's nice. It was a nice document, I think, because it actually puts some objective criteria to how they're looking at identifying areas versus just subjective. And I think that would go a long way politically when we present our recommendations, to know that there was actually some objectivity behind the process of identifying overlay districts. So that's something else that we as a task force and the consultant and the planning board will be looking at as well. Any other comments on the draft? Which is going to be draft of, number 1 of 57, I think, by the time we get done.
Carol, one thing I didn't see in here that is standard, and it's usually, it falls under like the header of administration or something like that, is that the planning board has the authority to adopt and amend regulations. I think you'd have to have that in the bylaw. You'd have to have that authority specified so that you can do that.
Okay, thank you for that. We'll pass that on to Jeff. And maybe Janet, if you could be a little bit more specific and send an email to Jasmine with that.
I will, yes. I'll
Okay,
take it. Yep.
I would certainly hope at this point in time that Jeff is aware and providing us with the standard stuff that needs to be in there. So it's a little bit concerning.
Okay. Yeah, I'll pull out the language from the stormwater bylaw.
Okay, thank you.
Send that on. Yep.
I do know that another thing that we're going to be adding is the right of the planning board to hire a consultant to work on these applications at the expense of the applicant, not unlike what the ZBA does with 40Bs. So anyway, as you go through this and as you think about it, please share your thoughts. And if you see stuff in either professional material or just in the general press about MBTA that you think applies to Dover and to us, please forward it on. Because
Anna
more
has a
input, the
comment.
better.
Anna has something she'd like to say.
Oh yeah, quick question. I saw the plans applicants need to include wetlands, which is great. I wanted a question about vernal pools in specific. So we have a vernal pool bylaw. They're not protected by the DEP directly. Do we want to call that out? Because one of the concerns, especially with Red Robin 2, has been so much encroachment on the vernal pool. We may already just have handled that, but that was one thing I was wondering if we wanted to protect specifically.
I think generally speaking, since this is going to be a new bylaw and one that we don't have any experience with, the more detailed we are in it, the better. So from a Conservation Commission standpoint, if you and Janet and other Concom members have specific thoughts as to how to protect the conservation aspects, Concom aspects, please forward them on to us. We really appreciate that.
Okay. Sounds good.
Anything else on this? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Carol and Jasmine. Well, Jasmine, Chris is leaving you high and dry. How dare he go get married this weekend and take time off?
Can't believe
But
it.
you and he were listed just to give a little update on the housing website.
Yes, so we did update some things on the housing website. We did add information about Safe Harbor, how we obtain Safe Harbor, how we're just adding to our housing inventory at 1 to 2% per project within a calendar fiscal year would put us in Safe Harbor for 1 to 2 years. And we provided links to state resources that expand on what Safe Harbor is and how we can attain it. We've also provided a timeline chart for 40B review that Fields and Thomas did. It's very, it might need some help for some people to review it, but looking at it from our perspective, it's pretty intuitive, the process, how it works. But it's something that if the public looks at it, it's a good visual tool, and they can always call with questions for us to walk them through it if they have any questions about that 40B review process. But it is a neat timeline of when things are submitted, when decisions are due by, when the state gets involved, when the town decisions are due, all of that process. And then we did add some additional information about current 40B developments, and we're working on a page for Tisdale right now to include the application, the Pell letter that we had. So that way there's just a one landing page for all of that information. And we have updated some of the links to some of the other 40B housing resources just to provide additional information about essentially how our housing inventory is created, what our 10% looks like, and again, safe harbor. But other than that, I think we've updated the main planning board page. Just some of our recent initiatives, and something that we'll continue to do as we move forward, and obviously continue to find links in relevant or irrelevant pages and link them appropriately as we go. But that's the biggest update that we have for the website. I know Chris was working on a lot of the search capabilities that we have. That's something that we're really trying to narrow in on some of our pages, so that way the search criteria works a little bit better for people, because it's not always intuitive where to go. So we would like that search bar to work as well as it can.
Great. Any questions, or I know Jasmine, Chris, certainly if you come across good information you think would be helpful on there, please don't hesitate to share it with them. Hi, Robin.
Hey, sorry, it took me a while to unmute.
And sorry, I think you had texted me, thank you, because I think you were in the waiting room and I didn't see you in there, so that's on me.
I'm gonna let you continue.
Well, we're getting to the end here, so
Okay, my
there's no
timing
other
is
questions on the website. I was going to turn over to Anna. She's been doing quite a bit of work behind the scenes on the sustainability committee, or wherever I don't know what the final name will be, but do you want to talk about give an update on kind of where things are at?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I sent out all the committees I'd reviewed, their charters, their descriptions of themselves. I started looking at local towns that were kind of similar, Medfield, Sherburne, Wellesley, and then kind of got wider and wider and wider until I was eventually finding myself looking at Stoughton, just to kind of get a sense of all the possibilities that people could do here. And the answer is a lot. It looks like a lot of committees started up around the Green Communities Act in 2008, and they're very geared toward energy and emissions reduction and green energy, which is great. And then there's been a trend lately, for obvious reasons, of climate action committees, which are more geared toward climate resilience, in addition to maybe net zero targets or other things. Wellesley is a particularly focused committee on getting toward net zero. I don't think we're there yet. We're more in the advising area. So I started working on a charter. I will email out the draft. Here we go. It's a Google Doc. You should be able to open the link. And essentially what I'm trying to focus on is the committee will advise selectmen and other folks on emissions, climate resilience, natural resource conservation that isn't directly wetlands, so water, but also shade and green energy and such like that. And then I was building in ideas. Maybe we could help boards audit their projects. Maybe we could encourage clear measurable goals, because I think we really want to be able to clearly show the town where we are, making changes to be more sustainable and reduce our emissions. So that I would love feedback on the charter. I'm going to keep working on it. I think the structure is the biggest thing I'm trying to figure out right now. My idea at the moment is to have 7 members. We could do more, but it gets a little unwieldy. But 1 from recycling, appointed by recycling, 1 appointed by school, 1 appointed by conservation, someone from capital budget, some folks from the town, and then a non-voting liaison to the selectmen. It could be voting if you all wanted to. I went back and forth. Janet suggested maybe that person could vote. But also if it's advising, I could see it being non-voting. And then a couple associate members who are at least 15. And this was kind of my idea I was excited about. So we could maybe get some high schoolers who were interested in wanting to share their perspective on all this, but aren't necessarily seniors. So that's the structure as is. It could use some changes. Maybe we want someone from planning or health, but at the same point, I don't want to ask everyone to assign somebody, because that could get hard. And then I was thinking we'd have a chair and a secretary and some limits and rotations there. But that's the current progress. Questions, ideas?
And then I think, it's important to have like town employees be a part of it as well. Because
Mhm.
the one thing that this committee has shown is how important that is. So I think it would be great to get feedback from, and Mike, you could let us know who you think might be best from the town perspective. Like, for instance, earlier this week, I have a good friend who has a company that focuses on sustainability for multifamily housing. And she forwarded it to me, a Green School Works webinar, which is a new program, and I'll forward it to this committee. It's a new program that the Commonwealth has, and there's a lot of dollars associated with it, basically to put in energy efficient type equipment and to think about sustainability. And so I forwarded it to capital budgets and the schools.
Mm.
Dawn said she had already signed up for the webinar because she had no idea that this existed. So I just wonder, how many more of these programs are out there? So that's why this committee, I think could really help with, different kinds of grants and programs that
Yeah.
are out there. So I'll forward that along because these webinars are free. And I was thinking I might just register for one of them, just to learn more about what they're thinking about. So,
Sounds great.
I mean, Carol, what do you think is the planning board? Is there interest for a member to be on this? I felt when Anna and I talked a little bit, we thought recycling was really important. The recycling committee, capital, since they are already kind of plugged into the green communities. I don't want to duplicate efforts, and I don't want in any way to minimize the impact some of these committees have already had on what we're trying to do. It's just trying to have a central focus.
I think that's totally true. I would say that the planning board as in itself is not,
Right.
though we have interest, is not necessary, but the tree committee is a committee of the planning board.
Oh,
And the tree committee, obviously,
Yeah,
since
that
they've
would,
done all the
right.
input already on tree stuff. So I would say that Val Lynn is our planning board member who chairs the tree committee. And probably should reach out to Val about whether she wants to be on it or somebody else. Janet's also on that committee, so there's the overlap as well. But certainly I think the tree committee as a subset of the planning board would be relevant to this.
Mm.
I'd also say from a recycling committee standpoint, over the years, we've worked with the high school. And we've had juniors and seniors over the years who have come and done special projects for us and been involved. So I think it's a wonderful idea to reach out to them. And I can't remember off the top of my head the name of the committee. There's actually some kind of green committee that's at DS.
Right.
You
I
can
can't
call
think
into
of
admin, right, and find out. But we've always been very successful with that. And when we did a pay-as-you-throw process at town meeting, I don't know, 6 or 7, 8 years ago, a lot of that stuff was put together by a wonderful intern, if you will, from the high school. So I think that's a great idea.
great. Awesome. Okay, go for it.
You know, it's possible to think of a lot of people who might want to be represented or should be represented, and it's going to be very hard to keep the numbers down. But I agree that when you get over 7, it gets very unwieldy very quickly. But two other areas that we need to keep in mind are our water resources and also the issue of groundwater protection. It's a focus of the Board of Health. I don't feel like we necessarily need to be represented, but I think we need to keep that in mind. And I don't know who the best person is to represent the issues of water resources at this point, but that's a very important concern, of course.
Well,
That's
we have the report, and, certainly at some point we would have to update it. There's a lot of things going on. One of the things Aquarian is looking into is whether or not it makes sense for them to connect to Dedham Westwood water, and by default that they would then be connected to the NWRA, because they have a PFAS issue, and this is actually the least expensive way for them to deal with that. So, we're trying to see what the outcome of that might be. Then, based upon the study or the modeling that was done by CDM Smith on the capacity of the aquifer, the outcome of that is there is sufficient capacity. However, they caution that certain areas of the town, if overdeveloped, would run into issues. So then, my thought was, and something we should think about is, should we put a bylaw in place that basically said any multifamily development requires that this modeling gets updated so we understand the impact on water in that area? Because if you overbuild in one area, it's definitely going to impact water. So, these are things we should be looking to. And the question is, where does that fall? Does it fall to this committee to make the recommendation? Does it fall to the Board of Selectmen? But certainly things that we're thinking about as a board.
And I would
Right.
also mention that prior to the water issues being taken over by the selectmen, resulting in the CDM Smith study, there was a water study committee under the Board of Health. And there were all kinds of recommendations made then that really fall under what I would consider a sustainability committee. And there'd been a lot of research done that we can share on various regulations relative to the use of sprinkler systems and registering contractors so that we can notify them when we're going into a drought situation, emergency situation, and they can make sure that their clients have timers and the regulations that require that systems have the latest and the greatest and all that kind of water monitoring stuff. So there's that aspect of sustainability where research has always been done, and I'll get you it. I've got to find it, but I'll get it to you.
Yeah,
and
that'd
that
be
was
great.
certainly CDM Smith's recommendation, that the one thing we can control is consumption, and we should be doing everything that we possibly can to educate the town about what you can do. We're in a precarious position because we have no idea what the water consumption is on private wells, right?
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
no way to measure that, which is why we put those monitoring wells in place. So that we could look overall at the groundwater levels. So the question is, and maybe the sustainability committee also is like, should we add more wells? We know where the wells
Maybe.
are, did them on town-owned property, but are there other locations where maybe we should look to put wells? And, certainly this whole Aquarian outreach to Dedham Westwood also adds another component to it that we're going to be looking at closely. And they have committed to keeping us up to date on the progress of their negotiations.
Great.
I think that the number of possible topics that a sustainability committee could take on is
Unlimited.
unlimited.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
we're just brainstorming a few right here.
Right.
And I actually think that's wonderful. The challenge is going to be who sits on this committee and how does it work with other town boards and departments and leaders to deal with some of the issues. I mean, let's say the sustainability committee decides that the town really needs to tackle invasive plants. That's kind of a joke because that's my
That's your thing.
but
Oh, me too. I love it.
but you know, so the sustainability committee might take up that topic or any one of a number of topics, and having the right people on that committee is so that at least somebody's thinking about groundwater protection and the various departments that might be involved in decisions about using herbicides or whatever it might be that gets done. And yet, as you said, not having too many people.
Right. And maybe as the committee gets established and puts together their goals and objectives for a year, you know, we can include that on the website under the town's goals and objectives. And for various projects, we could get different subject matter experts involved or reach out.
It's my hope. I also had the idea, I forgot to mention, about, and this is non-standard, so I haven't decided if I like it yet. Having the committee be able to appoint like an ad hoc liaison for specific projects. So there's do we want to drill more monitored wells? So we need Board of Health. So we appoint someone for 6 months to a year to be a liaison. I don't know if that's even a necessary structure, but it came out of a thought process similar that there could be a wide variety of projects that this committee tackles, especially over time, because I mean, hopefully we last longer than a few years, at which point the climate resiliency issues will evolve.
Mike, you know governance better than any of us. Is it something that needs to be in the charter, or is it just a practice we could adopt?
Yeah, I think it could just be a practice. Yeah, just because you want to have some flexibility,
Right.
So I think that makes sense.
That's great. I can delete that then and make it that much easier to read.
And
so then, and I would say the next steps would be maybe at our next meeting next month, we really focus on the charter and get to a point where you could come and present it to the Board of Selectmen so that we could adopt it as an official committee. Because my goal would be to be able to advertise, for lack of a better word, this committee at Dover Days. So that maybe we could get people excited and because this is for the whole community. So
I have one other question, which has to do with the concept of the sustainability coordinator, or whatever the title is. I'm assuming that there's no point to addressing that in the charter, but I just want to be sure that that's a correct point of view.
Well, that's a budget item because we would have to add to the budget and we would need to get town meeting approval, but it could certainly be something that the committee could look at. Mike and I have talked brainstorming on numerous occasions about, maybe hiring a grant writer, sharing a grant writer with another town because that person is going to pay for themselves. So maybe that ties into this. I don't know. Again, it's just thinking out loud. I've
loved. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just know if we could have a dedicated grant writer, and not just a grant writer, but somebody out there actively looking at different kinds of grants that are available, this position would pay for itself. Or like if Janet knows of a grant, she could just contact this person and say, hey, I know this grant is available. We should get in line, because like if it weren't for my friend, we would never know about this green work school fund that the Commonwealth has set up. So
Just gonna say, I would
So-
love for one of our first things to be to find the split sustainability coordinator with Sherburne once we've gone through the next town meeting and
Right.
you know hopefully succeeded. But yeah, that's very much a thing I would like to do, because hope with any luck we have a lot of questions and we need to write grants and this person needs to
Right.
answer questions and write grants.
right. Because it's time consuming to write the grants.
Mhm.
And there's an art to it as well. So,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, if you know what to put in them, you have a higher likelihood of actually getting the grant. I mean, to me, it was amazing that we were able to get the $500,000 maximum grant for the Carroll Community Center.
Yeah.
You know, that was definitely an amazing thing, and we have Barry Goldman to thank, because I think he drove them absolutely nuts at Green Communities, and they were like, we're just giving this guy the maximum amount so we don't hear from him for 2 years. But you know, he figured out, because we rewrote the grants a couple of times, but
Well, I'll add to that the $186,000 that the town just
Right.
got for the rail trail, with the major thanks to Jasmine, who's on today, for her work with that.
yes, thank you, Jasmine.
Yeah, awesome. Well,
So,
okay, I would love other feedback and I'll try and finalize in a month.
Right. So what you should do, Anna, because I know I'm guilty, maybe ping people like 2 weeks before the meeting. I could try too and just say, hey, guys, the focus of the next meeting is this. Could you pay attention to it? Or send me your
That's good.
feedback.
And I'll also email Val Lynn and see if I can grab some time with her to get her take on this.
Okay. I mean, the other thing is, and I could reach out, you know, Patricia Hudson, who's
Yes.
at the UN. She might be somebody, and this is what she does, but she might be somebody who would be willing just to act as an advisor and look at the charter, see if there are things that she thinks that maybe we should add, or whether she has
Yes.
ideas.
That would be great. Should I contact you and ask for contact info, or do you want to talk to her?
I'll contact her, unless Kay wants to. But I can contact her and say, it's not a heavy lift. It's an advisory role until you retire.
I'd be happy to contact her, or we could have Carol do it. Then there's no possibility that she would say no.
I am happy to talk to her. I will shoot her an email, ask her.
Just before we close, just to Anna's discussion about membership, you know, I think she is right on about 7 really is kind of the
Right.
maximum workable, manageable number. But, you know, it's always a good reminder as people express interest, you don't have to be on the committee to participate, right? You can go to meetings, you can volunteer for side
Right.
tasks and side quests with the committee. Like those things are doable.
Special projects.
Yeah. So, you know, I'm hoping you
Yeah.
get way more than 7 people interested. And even though you can only pick 7 to have an official seat at the table,
Right.
you know, we don't want to stop other people and make sure people
Right.
know they can participate.
Right. And I mean, everybody is so busy, but this could be a way for a busy person to get involved, because we could actually, they could be involved in a project and still add
Yeah.
value.
That's right.
Am I selling? I keep telling people I had a full-time job, a kid. There was no email. That's how old I am. And I had to go to the townhouse and pick up that manila envelope with all the stuff in it for the warrant committee meetings.
Those were the days.
Yeah, so Carol, I was trying to think, did we fax agendas to people? How did we get them?
There were those packages. Remember those paper
Oh,
packages that we got?
right, right,
Oh
right.
my God. Yeah.
And you
We
had to
had
go pick it up.
We had to go pick it up. Yep. Yep. Ah, yes. Yes. We didn't quite do it by horse and buggy, but horse and buggy, but we did have to go pick it up. Absolutely.
Right.
And before we close, I would like to once again, sort of on the same vein of Anna's request, is that bylaws, by definition, the devil is in the detail. So please, Board of Health, Concom, Building Inspector, please take a look word by word, line by line at these drafts and give us your input. Whether it's just a word or a comma or a thought or a philosophy. We really need to get as much input as we can. Thank you.
So one of the things I was wondering is the best way to do all of this via email, or should I request that we set up a Google Drive on the town website that we all have access to, that we can put, because like, for instance, I have all the agendas, my notes, material we covered, and I'd be happy to stick that on a Google Drive instead of me just having it.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm
Yeah, that'd be
happy
great.
to create one and send a link out, share it with everybody here.
Okay, good. Because Warren started doing it and Capital started doing it, and it works great. And I actually uploaded 7 years of files from Capital that I had on a private Dropbox into the Google Drive.
It's great. We've been doing it on land management. I'll take minutes as we talk.
Right. All right, that would be great. Thanks, Mike.
We use Google Docs, obviously, to keep track of all our comments and drafts for the bylaws.
That's great.
All right, well, George, welcome. We really are happy to have you on ZBA. Sorry, I missed your introduction, but.
Oh, we
And I
know
think-
he's well enough, and
Right.
oh, listen, this will be fine. And thank you. I've learned a lot just in this last hour. You folks have been working hard and creatively.
Yeah, that's because Mike runs a better meeting than me.
Listen,
I speed through it.
So
Right,
is
well-
our next meeting on the 24th or the 31st of July? Is it the last or the third? Or
It's the last. So our next meeting is on the books for the 31st.
Okie dokie.
All right, I'll try get the agenda out earlier. I got
And
it
then
up
like your
3 days.
suggestion, Robin, of pinging people, I'll do the same thing for things we
Okay.
need. I think that's great.
would that be an afternoon meeting, same time on the
Yeah,
31st?
always the same time.
Oh, good.
And we'll get Mona to send you, there's a recurring meeting, so it should
Okay.
show up in your calendar, so we'll have her send it to you.
Yeah,
Well,
I can do that right now. As soon as we get off, I'll take care of that.
excellent.
Okay. All right, well, thank you, everybody. Happy July 4th. Can't believe it's July 4th.
It is.
Thank you,
Okay.
everyone. Enjoy the summer. Use
Right.
some motion.
Hey,
Drink
Okay,
margaritas.
Right.
bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.